Hello, welcome to this Facts and Things podcast, focusing on the water industry and specifically on Thames Water Utilities Limited in the main. Now, before I go on to questions as to how well or otherwise Thames Water Utilities Limited is performing generally, I think it's probably going to be helpful to look at some of these facts here. So, for example, firstly, where Thames Water Utilities Limited sits in the group structure of companies, or TWUL, as I'll use the shortened version there. TWUL's, Thames Water Utilities Limited's financial issues, an overview table, and also a short comment on when dividends can or cannot be paid, a short commentary on capital maintenance. But there will be other things that I discuss generally as well. Now, before we go on to that though, some basic facts and things about the water industry and its privatisation might be of some use in setting this whole thing in context. So firstly, you may or may not recall, but the Conservative Party was government in 1989, and at that time the Water Act 1989, it was that Act of Parliament that provided that the then government owned water industry was privatised. Now, in a debate on water privatisation about 3 years after this, in 1992, it was reported in Hansard government records. There's an interesting piece of political debate with Labour MP Anne Taylor making the following motion: that this House is alarmed at the record profits, record dividends and record salaries and perks of top management in the water companies, especially at a time when households are facing record water bills, etc. The Conservative MPs countered with comments that investment had been increased since privatisation, and that increased investment had to have taken place because, well, they blamed it on European regulations. Of course, when they talk about underinvestment, at that stage the Conservatives had been in 10 or 11 years, so I suppose they were sort of in a fashion blaming themselves. Anyway, it's interesting in my view that this is a good example of how little the debate has moved on in terms of the lines of argument that both main political parties may well use. Now, 30 years on from privatisation in 2019, there were, of course, on the 30th anniversary, various articles written in the press, and one can be found on the Chartered Institution of Water and Environmental Management website, which is titled 30 Years On, What Has Water Privatisation Achieved? And you can see here that there are various parties who commented on what has been achieved at the 30th anniversary, including the then Water UK Chief Executive, who I think has now left. Anyway, his view that you can see there was that the water industry in England has been transformed, and it's easy to forget how bad things were. After decades of government underinvestment, water quality was poor, rivers were polluted, and our beaches badly affected by sewage. The water industry was not high on ministers' list of priorities. As I've already said, essentially the last 11 years have been Conservative Party in government. On the other hand, though, there were other comments. At the time, Shadow Chancellor of the Exchequer, John McDonnell, his view was much different. He says there 30 years essentially of 30 years ago, our water, something which we all owned, was sold off. Privatisation has largely enriched private shareholders who've done little to invest in this essential public service. When the water companies were sold off, the government took on their historic debts. Since then, they've accumulated over £45 billion worth of debt. That's ultimately the responsibility of bill payers or governments. And then there were various other commentaries as well. So a few years on from that, we have here a paper, Strategy for Introducing Competition in the Water Sector, or sections from that, Martin Cave and Janet Wright, and this is the comment that stood out to me. In 2008, the governments of England and Wales commissioned an independent review of competition and innovation in the provision of water and sewerage services. The review's remit was to recommend changes to the legislation and regulation of the industry in England and Wales, which would deliver benefits to consumers. Completed in April 2009. And the review concluded that competition and innovation have an important role to play in addressing these issues, but in an industry made up of vertically integrated regional monopolies, there's no real competition between providers, few customers can choose their supplier, and takeovers are discouraged. Incentives to innovate are also limited and often are too weak to outweigh the risk. So if we then move on to this next paper, Open Water, Impacts of Retail Competition on Service Performance and Water Use Efficiency in England. And as it says there in the abstract, this paper examines the retail water service market introduced in England in 2017, allowing non-domestic consumers to choose their water retailer. And it says there, market competition was intended to motivate service improvement and enhance water use efficiency. Interview and survey data on the responses of incumbent water companies and the impact on consumers reveal varied strategic responses but no significant change in service quality or bills. It says high transaction costs linked to market complexity, incompetent data management, asymmetric information and regulatory restrictions account for the limited impact of market opening. Finally, contrary to expectation, the retail market does not appear to affect water use efficiency uptake significantly. And then in the discussion and conclusion, it says our survey analysis shows minimal positive impact from retail water market competition, even when considering only businesses that are aware of the market. The market has generated some competition and efficiency incentives in this segment, demonstrated by the entry of new companies, retailers' efforts to improve service and savings on water bills. However, for most non-household customers, the market has led to no significant change in bills, service quality, or the range of services on offer. Anyway, just a little bit on how the government had attempted previously to introduce some element of competition into the frame. You'll see here that this is the ofwat.gov.uk website, and it talks about how non-household customers are charged, and you'll see here that it talks about charges for customers who use more than, I think that's 50 million litres of water. Are not subject to price limits, and you'll see here anyway there's some detail on the arrangements for competition if you fell into the bracket of those 1.2 million non-household customers who were able to benefit from that, and that's here on this Ofwat website page as well, business retail market. Okay, with that brief background and some commentary on the type of arguments that the right and the left will use, so the right often using the arguments that efficiency is improved by privatisation, costs are brought down, there's more ready access to capital, finance and so on. On the other side of the spectrum, the left of the political spectrum, arguing that there's no real competition as such because essentially water providers are monopolies within certain areas. We've seen there's been some attempt with non-domestic to provide some competition. They'll also argue the water industry's built up substantial debt and as such hasn't been shown to perform that much better, if at all, than before privatisation. And these are the sort of arguments that are bandied around. Let's have a look at Thames Water Utilities Limited and see how they are doing. And I think the first point to consider from the PowerPoint slide was where Thames Water Utilities Limited actually sits in the group structure of companies. And so I've gone to Companies House website, and you can find in here for this particular company, if you go to the accounts, let's say, and let's look at the latest set of accounts, you'll see here in this financial review it gives the structure which is of use here, in so much as it just gives you a quick overview. This is the critical company here, the one that provides the services. This is a parent company of it. There is another a company above it that owns the shares in Thames Water Utilities Holdings Limited, and an associated company. There is another company here, Kimball Water Finance Limited, that sits above the various parties here, and ultimately there are some shareholders who sit right at the top, so basically owning all of the companies in this group structure, is essentially, or rather owning the holding company that sits right at the top. And so essentially being the owner of that means this company owns that company, this company owns that company, and this company owns that company. So you can see how it works. You'll see here that Thames Water Utilities Limited paid a £45 million dividend to its parent company. We'll come to that fairly shortly. But if we just go down to page, it's page 69 of about 180 odd pages in this annual report, you'll see there the actual group structure in terms of who the external shareholders are here. So you'll see here the external shareholders are, well, who have you got? You've got University Superannuation Scheme owning 19%. You've got Infinity Investments 9.9%. So various investors here who ultimately own this company here, that company, and this company owns that company, and this company owns that company, and so on, until ultimately you get to Thames Water Utilities Limited here, which is the critical company in so much as it is the one that provides the various services. This one is a subsidiary of Thames Water Utilities, and I think is used to raise finance on the markets. That is an overview there of the structure in terms of who ultimately owns the company group that includes Thames Water Utilities Limited. So you can see the major shareholder there is University Superannuation Scheme. If you wanted some more details on how these various companies within the group interact, you can find those on the Thames Water website. That's https://www.thameswater.co.uk/about-us/our/structure. So basically going to the Thames Water website and looking for governance and our structure. Now, moving on to point 2 about Thames Water Utility Limited's financial issues, if I can describe them as that. We're on the 2023 accounts, and you saw on page 44, and then I went to page 70 here on the structure of the group. But now if we go to, let's say, profit and loss and the balance sheet. So if I go to profit and loss firstly, as they describe consolidated income statement here, you'll see there that, we just expand it a little bit, you'll see there that we have operating profit total for 2023. You see it has 2022 and 2023 of 356 million. Profit here before taxation 1.8 million. The loss for the year 30.1 million. So that's income. No dividends paid in that year, as there haven't been, well, other than the one that's being, I think, investigated by Ofwat at the moment, which is a 37.5 million payment to its immediate parent company. But if we now go on to the balance sheet, essentially, you can see here that the interesting points are as follows. You've got here various current liabilities. You can see their borrowings from various lenders. That's 2,280 million, so 2.28 billion of short-term borrowings, that is, so owed in less than a year. I won't look at any of the other borrowings. Then you've got non-current liabilities, ones that are owed out, in more than a year's time, and you'll see their borrowings from various lenders and so on. About 13.8 1.4 billion pounds. So an awful lot of borrowings. Here's the total equity, the value of equity owed to the shareholders. It currently stands at 1.4 billion. On the screen now are some figures that I've selected from the accounts from Companies House for Thames Water Utilities Limited from 1990 through to 2023, and I've just selected some elements from the profit and loss, or income statement as it's described sometimes in these accounts, and also from the balance sheet. So you can see here they're all in millions, these figures. I've taken the profit for the financial year, the dividends, monies that are transferred to and from reserves. If they're shown in brackets, basically is monies taken out of the company or out of the reserves. From the balance sheet, creditors, the amount that is a liability owed to creditors and payable within 1 year, creditors payable after 1 year, and then the amount that is owed to shareholders. So here in 1990, £1.327 million owed to the shareholders if they all sold their shares and wanted the monies back. Let's see the interesting points. Dividends. A lot of dividends paid out over the years, certainly in the first few years. You can see here in 1996, £648 million of dividends, and they dipped into the reserves from the previous year, adding onto the profits, and basically paid out huge amount in dividends. And then more dividends paid out all the way up till 2009. Then there seems to be a fall off the cliff. So let's have a look and see what we can gauge as perhaps reason for that. Well, we've got here creditors. These would have to be added together, obviously, to find out how much debt. So that is £295 million worth of debt in 1990. But it starts creeping up here. So what have we got in the year 2000? It's gone to about £2.5 billion. In 2005, what's it gone to now? About 3.3 billion. 2010, it's now up to about 6-7 billion. 2015, we're coming to figures of about 10 billion. And then finally, when we get up to 2023, here we are at figures of about 15 and £15.7 billion worth of debt, amount owed to shareholders, £1.825 billion still. So, interesting figures there in terms of the development of the amount of debt that is being accrued by this company, and the large amount of dividends that was paid in the first, quite a few years, first 18 or so years, and potential issues are obviously the huge amount of debt that is owed and the restructuring that is going on. More of that in a moment. Okay, so turning to the third element of this podcast, the short comment on when dividends cannot be paid. In the context of the Thames Water company, Thames Water Utilities Limited, there was a report on the Sky News website which basically is headed "Dividend Amid Debt Pile and Pollution Fines Sparking Ofwat Query." And in that article, it indicates the issue of the Thames Water Utilities Limited paying dividends of 37.5 million to its parent company, which is Thames Water Utilities Holdings Limited. You'll recall from that diagram before. So they're being investigated, I believe, on that front as to whether or not they should actually have paid dividends, whether it was in contravention of the regulations. In simple terms, in regard to this payment, there are rules in the Companies Act 2006 and also in various accounting guidance which deals with when and how dividends should be made, and there are rules on what is called capital maintenance, as to i.e. the maintenance of share capital, so monies that's put into a company by the shareholders. There is a rule that essentially, without the consent of the court or special procedures, that capital mustn't be returned to shareholders. So, in other words, capital has to generally be maintained as it's the fund to which lenders essentially would look for payment of the various debts that might be owed to them. So generally speaking, dividends can't be paid out of capital, but only out of distributable profits. Now, the meaning of distributable profits is quite a complex one. So you can see on the screen details of a technical release by the Institute of Chartered Accountants in England and Wales, Tech 024/17BL, and you can see down here lots of information on this, but profits available for distribution 2.7 to 2.8e, and just here is the profits available for distribution. Lots of information there. Company may make a distribution only out of profits available for that purpose. That's from 830 subsection 1 of the Companies Act 2006. Company's profits available for distribution are its accumulated realised profits, less its accumulated realised losses, etc. Lots of information there, but also there will be regulatory rules, regulations that apply to the water companies that are also imposed on them in regard to these types of distributions. So it'll be interesting to see what comes out of this investigation. So this podcast has looked at the issue of Thames Water specifically, and the large amount of debt that it has accrued, and also looking at the fairly large amounts of dividends that were paid, certainly in the first 15 or so years since privatisation. The issues that now face it as a company, not paying dividends, but having said that, it did lastly pay some dividends to its parent company, and that's currently being investigated. But essentially, the regulator Ofwat is not particularly happy. As you can see by this headline here, water companies must deliver a step change in performance and investment, and it's laid out this timetable down here. There will be argument and counter-argument depending on which side of the political spectrum you are. So whether it's competition is required to keep prices down, the other side will argue, well, there's very little competition, there's some non-domestic competition that's been put in place, but whether or not that is actually effective is debatable. There'll be some saying, oh, you need to be and they need to be privatised entities, because then they, as companies, can raise capital on the money markets more easily than governments are able to do. There'll be others on the other side saying, well, that just depends on how keen the governments are to actually do something about financing. There'll be some saying, well, it's all too late now, you'd have to pay billions to the shareholders. Well, we've seen for Thames Water that the equity is about 2 billion. Now, of course, valuation of limited companies is not just done on the basis of what the equity value is on the balance sheet, but there will be some who say, well, perhaps it should be privatised. There'll be some on the other side saying, oh, but government shouldn't be running these types of businesses because they're no good at that. There'll be others on the other side saying, well, if we're no good at that, why are we any good at setting tax rates and all sorts of other things? And the argument doesn't apply as well when it comes to, for example, the other areas such as NHS and defence and so on. So if defence can be fairly efficient and they're essentially not a public private sector body, then these arguments become very nuanced, and really depends on which side of the political spectrum you lie as to whether or not you believe one or the other. So lots of different interesting arguments, but certainly at the moment I think most people, or certainly Ofwat, would agree that there's an underperformance and something needs to be done.